Okay, so I'm back and we're moving on to calculating the cost of equity, debt, and preferred stock. And we'll start with the cost of equity. And I have some good news for you because you've already done this before. As you can see up here, there's two different ways to calculate the cost of equity. You can use the dividend growth model, which we haven't actually gone over yet, and you'll learn after the exam. Uh, but I'm not too concerned about right now. But we're going to be using the CAPM, which you learned previously. And here's the equation for the CAPM right there. The expected return is equal to the risk-free rate plus the expected market return minus the risk-free rate times beta. And there's the resultant graph that we get showing the relationship between the stock's systemic risk, the beta, and the expected return on the y-axis. So that's pretty straightforward. And sometimes what you're going to get is a question that already provides you with the stock's cost of equity. And sometimes they're going to give you all that information. They're going to ask you to calculate it. Or they may just give you, they want you to do the CAPM equation, but they'll give you the market risk premium, which is this right here. So you won't have to calculate that. So be prepared for different possibilities. So I want you to try and understand a little bit about what the cost of equity means, because you don't see the cost of equity on the income statement anywhere, do you? No, you don't. So Christian, where does the cost of equity show up? Well, Professor Gehring, the cost of equity shows up on the statement of cash flows under financing activities, dividends paid. Why, yes, Christian, that's a correct answer. Thank you. So the cost of paying dividends, it truly is a cost, and equity has a cost. If it didn't, then balance sheets would not have any debt on them because we would just finance everything with equity. But that doesn't make sense because shareholders want to get paid too. So how do they get paid? Well, they get paid with dividends, which is a cash outflow. It's a use of cash, and they also get paid through capital appreciation by holding onto their stock. They expect to realize a return over time. So there is a cost to it. And just for somewhat of a definition, you could call it the minimum rate of return required to maintain your share price. I'll say that one more time because I'm not going to write it down, but it's the minimum rate of return required to maintain share price. As a manager, you want to maintain the share price because if you can't provide an adequate rate of return, what's going to happen? Your share price is going to go down, and you're going to get fired, and your shareholders are going to leave. So you don't want that. So just to think about that for a minute here, what that means is if the return that you provide is below the security market line, what has to happen in order to revert back to the SML like we talked about? Well, the share price is going to have to decrease in order to get that return back up to where our investors expect, which is at around 12. Here's another example. Let's say that share price is above, which is an interesting conflict because in the book it talks about the fact that you really can never expect to achieve returns that are above the security market line. But as managers and financial managers, we're always told that you should try to achieve returns that exceed the cost of equity, the expected return that investors are getting on their risk. And so that's an interesting conflict that I can't really explain. But just by way of example, this dot on the security market line, let's say that we have a $100 share price and you're earning 12%, so $12 for 100. But then what if it does go up? It goes up to 14. So temporarily your stock is earning more, which is what you want. But then, like we talked about in class, what's going to happen is that this is an underpriced stock. You're getting more value than you're paying for. So what's going to happen is that the return isn't going to adjust, but the share price is going to have to increase. Sorry about that. And by my calculation, in order to get back to this security market line 12%, share price has to increase to 117 if it's providing a $14 return. And then when you divide the top by bottom, you get back to 12 again, just by illustration. And don't worry, I'm not going to test you on this. I just think that's interesting. Another question. So, will equity ever cost less than debt? And I just want you to maybe pause for a minute and think about that. So, will equity ever cost less than debt? Well, let's think about that. So, which is riskier, debt or equity? If a firm goes bankrupt, who gets paid first? The shareholders. I'm sorry, the creditors get paid first, right? So, if equity were to cost less, then what's going to happen? Well, all the shareholders are going to say, why am I buying stock that's riskier and makes less money than the debt? I'm better off investing in the debt, which pays higher and has less risk. So in general, you can always expect that the cost of equity is going to pay more than the cost of debt in order to reward the investors for the added risk that they're taking on. Okay, so the next part is the cost of debt. And with cost of debt, companies will either take out loans. Larger corporations generally will use bonds, which is similar to a loan. Most of what you're going to see in the homework is going to be bonds when you're working with cost of debt. And more good news is that you've done this before. So I'm going to write down cost of debt. My wife is just coming in right now, and I'm not going to film her because this camera would not do justice to her beauty. And so I'm just going to keep it on the board because she is really, really beautiful. But we're just going to keep powering through. So you've calculated the cost of debt before. You did it in chapters 5, 6, and 7. It's basically just time value of money. So it's bonds, okay? So with a bond, you have the present value, you have the future value, you have the payment, and you have N, and you have the I over Y, otherwise known as the yield to maturity. So this is what you're trying to solve. So they're going to give you this information up here. They may not give you the payment amount. They may say coupon rate, and you'll have to calculate the payment amount and plug that all in. Make sure that you're if it's a semi-annual coupon, that you're adjusting N to reflect that, as well as when you get the answer that you're adjusting I over Y. So if you have semi-annual, then you're going to have to multiply your I over Y by 2 to get the annualized rate. So that's pretty easy, right? However, there's one other thing we need to factor into this. Once you calculate the cost of debt, and let's just say it's, just to keep it really simple, we'll say it's 10%. And you have to consider the tax effect of this. I think I may have mentioned that before. So you get a break for debt. You can deduct it on your taxes, which is something you can't do for dividend payments. So the tax effect of debt is that you multiply it by 1 minus the tax rate. And we're saying that TC is the tax rate. So if the tax rate is 0.35, then you're multiplying 10% times 0.65, which equals 6.5%. I know you can't read that. 6.5% is your cost of debt. So just keep that in mind. This is the before tax cost of debt, and that's the after tax cost of debt. Too easy, right? So the last component is your cost of preferred stock. Not all the homework problems will ask you to calculate this, but some will. So we'll go through how to do that. Preferred stock is treated like a perpetuity, right? So what that means is that for valuing preferred stock, you treat it like perpetuity, but for calculating the cost, it's pretty simple. Okay, so the cost, which is the RP, equals the dividend payment. It's a fixed dividend divided by the price of the stock. And preferred stock, just like bonds and stocks, the price varies. It fluctuates, so you can't use the par value or the original value. You have to use the market value. So by example, let's say that you had a let's say that the par value is $100 and your stock is market value equals 93, and your D, or your dividend, equals 7%, which is $7, right? 7% of 100 is $7. So what you would do is divide 7 by the market value, which is 93, which equals 7.5. So there's your cost of preferred stock. So those are the three. It's the preferred stock, it's the cost of debt, and the cost of equity. So the next thing we have to figure are the capital structure weights. And we did that in the beginning, but we did it very simplistically. And it's not very difficult, but I want to show you what you can expect in some of the homework problems, which is more true to real life. The first thing to remember is that you need to use market value. Not book value. Okay, so I'm give you an example here. Let's say that you have common stock, and we're just looking at the liability and equity side of the balance sheet. So we have common stock of, let's see, 2.2 million. And we'll have preferred stock of 1 million. And bonds 550,000. You add it all up, you get 3,750,000. Okay. So, to get the relative percentages is pretty straightforward then at this point. You just divide this by this to get common stock. And when you do that, oh, I'm sorry. Scratch that last part. Pretend you didn't hear that. These are book values here, okay? So like I said, you can't use the book values. So there's an added step that you have to do. You have to convert them to market value. So let's say that you have 220,000 shares of common stock valued at $27 a share. That gets you 5.490 million. You can't read that. 5.490 million, which is not much better. So you're multiplying the number of shares times the market value of the stock. That gives you the total market value of the shares that you have outstanding. For preferred stock, let's say that you have 25,000 shares times, they're selling at $41 each, and you get 1.025 million. 1.025. And then last, your bonds. So bonds are a little bit different. So we have 550,000 in bonds, and they're selling at 101.2% of book, or of par, right? So all you have to do is multiply it by 1.012 to get your market value, which is 556,600. Okay. So just to reiterate, for the common stock, we took the number of shares outstanding times the market price per share, which is $27, to get 5.940 million. For the preferred stock, we had 25,000 shares times the share price of $41, resulting in 1.025 million. And for the bonds, we took the total bond issue of, actually it was 550,000 times the percentage. That can either be a premium or a discount. This one is selling at a premium of 1.012 to get 556,600. And you add those all together, you should get 7,512,600. So from there, you can divide these market values by the total market valuation of all three to get your percentages. And I'll show you what that looks like next. .789 for common stock. For preferred, equals 0.136 or 13.6%. And then for bonds, equals 0.074 or 74%, which should add up to 1 if you add those all together. So with this information and then the information on the cost of each of these types of financing, you would multiply those together to get the weighted averages. Then you add the three together, you get your weighted average cost of capital. There's one thing that I actually forgot to go over in the beginning that I want to touch on, and then we'll be done with this recording. And tomorrow what I'll do is I'll post some more videos that show some of the problems to give you a better illustration of how to work through those. So you might remember at the beginning of class we talked about cash flow from assets. Okay, what we said is that cash flow from assets is the money that is our assets produce, and there's only really two uses for those assets. You can use it to pay debt, and you can use it to pay your equity holders. So, and you could argue that your preferred stock holders are somewhere in the middle. So really, the weighted average cost of capital is basically just the other side of the cash flow from assets. So the assets produce all this cash flow, and the WACC is telling us where it goes. You know, does it go to pay our shareholders or our creditors? So really the equation should generally balance out, that there's money, and as a manager you're deciding where it goes to. So so that's all for now. So thank you.